Today, we're excited to have Shannon Diamond with us, who is a physical therapist. So, welcome, Shannon, to our session today. And I already see our students are busy asking questions into the chat. So, you
Yeah,
guys already know the protocol here, and I love it. But first things first, Shannon, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with the students your career journey and a little bit more about your background prior to coming to St. Nicholas right now.
absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Shannon Diamond. I am a physical therapist by background, and I'm also the manager for inpatient and outpatient therapy for St. Nicholas Hospital Sheboygan and Prevea in Sheboygan. I'd like to share my favorite story about a sense of humor at work. So, I actually do the hiring for my department now. And a few years ago, as a team building thing, and I have a very tight knit group of people, I think you'll find that a lot in healthcare. But we decided that for April Fool's Day, we were all wearing mismatched clothes. So I came into work wearing a Hawaiian shirt and plaid pants and a St. Patrick's sock and a Christmas sock. But it just so happened that day that I had an interview for a new physical therapist. And so I changed my shirt, but I did not change my sock. And after I gave her a tour and we sat down to start the interview, I crossed my legs and she looked at my socks and it said, "Oh, it's April Fool's Day today, so we're all wearing mismatched clothing." And most people, I think, in that situation would say, "Oh, that's kind of funny." And she went, "Mm-hmm." And I went, "I really don't think this person is going to be a fit for our department because we're a group of people who like to find humor in things and we're a very tight-knit group." So she did not end up getting the job. And my work is certainly a place where we like to have a sense of humor and have a lot of fun. I think it's really important in a workplace. And that's why I've worked at my job for almost 17 years now. My journey as a physical therapist actually started in high school. I was a ballet dancer. And in that field, you get a lot of injuries. So I had knee injuries, hip tendonitis, Achilles tendonitis, and I ended up having to have physical therapy in my junior year of high school. And I found it really interesting and I learned a lot. And then in my senior year of high school, I took anatomy and physiology, which I know aren't necessarily offered in every high school, but I went to Cedarburg and they were offered there. And I found them just to be really interesting classes. So I did not get accepted as a ballet major at Indiana University. I ended up minoring in ballet. And my first year, I was pre-physical therapy. And I got to the end of my freshman year, and I'd had more anatomy and physiology, and I had chemistry and physics. And I found out that I loved anatomy and physiology. And then they came back to me and said, "Hey, like you can be a ballet major in your sophomore year." And I said, "I think my career path is actually to be a physical therapist." So I finished up my undergraduate at Indiana University in exercise physiology. And then what's very interesting about physical therapy schools is that they all have different requirements. Some of them require 2 semesters of physics, some only require 1, some require statistics. There's a lot of different requirements. Every school is different. So just because you have an undergraduate degree in a certain science-related field does not mean you've met the requirements for physical therapy schools. So one piece of advice that I would say for my career path and getting into school was to check the requirements carefully and know that you have met them before you apply to those schools. So I ended up taking a year and I had to take more semesters of physics and I had to take genetics to get into Concordia University, which ended up working out great because I ended up with my master's from Concordia in physical therapy. And then as I was there, that program actually transitioned to a doctorate. So I was able to take some classes while I was finishing up my master's. And then once I started at St. Nicholas, which was my last clinical rotation, and then I was hired there, they actually helped me pay for that final class for my doctorate degree. And I started there doing a little bit of everything: inpatient therapy, outpatient therapy, home health. And now my focus over the years has become primarily outpatient therapy, even though I have connections to all of those other areas as well.
That is great. That is great. And so some of the questions that students have are more specific around like the higher education component in here. So is it like if you're going to become a physical therapist, can you do that with a bachelor's degree, or what is the specific trajectory that you would have to do for the educational portion of being a physical therapist?
So most schools now are doctorate programs. I believe there are a few master's programs out there, but most of them are a doctorate degree. And there's really two paths to enter into that. Either you're accepted like pre-physical therapy, Marquette does that. I believe Concordia still does that in the state of Wisconsin. And then your fourth year of your undergrad becomes your first year of your doctorate program. So you're in school a total of 6 years. That was not the way I did it. You can also get an undergraduate degree. Like I said, you have to make sure that that meets the requirements to apply whatever school you want to go to. Most people in their undergraduate degree will do athletic training, exercise science, or biology or chemistry. Something in a science-related field tend to be the most common. And then you apply to the program. So you would have, in that case, 4 years of undergraduate school and then 3 years of graduate school to complete your doctorate program.
Okay, yeah, so you definitely have to like school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Tara was asking something specific, and I heard you say anatomy and physiology a lot in when you were talking about your educational path. And she's wondering specifically in high school, like what are some of the classes that you would recommend you take while you're in high school to be prepared for this career?
Yeah, so anatomy and physiology, obviously, because if physics is offered, that is a great path to. I have to say, I don't use physics a lot in my daily life as a therapist, but for whatever reason, a lot of schools require it. And so then along with that, a strong basis in math subjects too. I feel like that really helped in those higher level physics classes. And then just any science, biology is helpful. Chemistry is, again, a requirement for school, so I would take that in high school as well. Those are probably the biggest ones. Once you get into your actual physical therapy program, then the courses become more diverse. You take advanced anatomy that includes usually a more advanced lab portion, exercise physiology. You do a course where you learn how to do all the tests and measures. You do courses on treatment, and then you have a different series of clinicals that can be in many different settings. Most schools require an inpatient clinical and an outpatient clinical, but then if you're interested in pediatrics or skilled nursing facility or home health, you can do clinicals in those as well. Kind of depends on the school, but usually there's at least 3 large clinical experiences as part of your graduate program.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of science involved in this field and a lot of different educational options and pathways. Even within the state of Wisconsin, I think there's a couple of colleges that offer you some programs that you can access with this. Okay, so let's now talk about your current role and really what most of the students are interested, what does a day look like? And I mean, really like detailed, if you can even share like typical hours and then, how many patients you see, what you're doing with those patients, it just helps give them the best understanding possible.
Sure. So one of the best things I think about a career in physical therapy is the schooling starts out very general, but then if you find an area that you're passionate about, if you want to work in schools, if you want to work with only spinal cord injury patients, you can specialize as much as possible. The best things about a career in physical therapy, I would say, is that you can work part-time or you can work full-time. Most physical therapists, it's a regular daytime job. Inpatient therapy, if you work for a hospital or if you work for like a nursing home, there's generally some weekend hours there, but you usually get days off during the week to make up for that. So I would say the typical is, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, kind of regular days in most of the settings. You have to be able to obviously use a computer. All of our documentation, our system is called Epic. There's a bunch of different systems out there. So you have to be able to type. That's a big thing. So when I start seeing a new patient in any setting, when you start seeing a new patient, you have to evaluate them. So you have to look at their range of motion and wherever they're having the problem, you have to look at their strength. You watch them walk or you watch them complete an activity that they're having difficulty with, and then you have to clearly document what it is you see in order to justify your treatment to insurance companies and in order for other people to be able to continue your plan of care. If you work in inpatient, you typically see people like a person that's had surgery and is in a hospital is probably only there for a couple days. But then you have people like our current population of COVID patients that can be there for a month or a month and a half. So an inpatient, I would say the general time you get to know a patient is not very long. In outpatient, if I see a person after a total knee replacement, I get to see them for 45-minute sessions 3 times a week for, 6 to 8 weeks. A shoulder surgery, I probably get to work with that patient for up to 3 months to get them back to all of the things they need to do. So after you evaluate a patient in any setting, then you determine what things they need to be able to do in order to get back to what they want to accomplish in life. And that's what I like the best about physical therapy is, and any of the therapies really, you get to see people make changes and you get to get them back to walking or talking or whatever their job is. So those things are really positive. And I like physical therapy a lot. Well, there's very minimal blood involved, which is what drew me to it. You still get to help people, but there's no blood like there is in nursing or being a doctor. But you really get to know people and spend a lot of time with them, and they really get to gain a trust in you, and they value your opinion. So then the actual hands-on treatment, it, again, depends on the patient and the setting. Some of it can be manual therapy, so massage or mobilizing shoulders, working on a person's ankle, those types of things. Therapists have a lot of specialty treatments too. So there's something that we utilize called dry needling, where you're putting a needle in a patient to work on tight spot, trigger point release. You can do ultrasound, which is a deep heat. So some of those kind of hands-on treatments that you do with patients. And then a lot of what we do too is education and exercises and a home exercise program. So stretching things that are tight, strengthening things that are weak, and then making sure the patient understands why we're doing those things, and then sending them home with instructions so that they can accomplish those things at home and continue to progress. Obviously, in outpatient therapy, they're only spending, 2 hours with me a week, and they need more treatment than that to be able to work through all of it. So in my day in outpatient, I would say we see a typical 1 or 2 new evaluations, and then probably 8 to 10 ongoing patients. And we see new evaluations for an hour. We see ongoing patients for 45 minutes, typically. I think that's pretty typical across most outpatient settings. Skilled nursing and inpatient hospital, you're probably spending a half an hour to 45 minutes with those patients. And you probably see more like 12 to 14 patients in a day. And then if you're in a home health setting where you're traveling to people's homes and treating them, you probably see maybe 5 or 6 patients in a day, depending if they're new evaluations or ongoing patients. And again, after every single patient, and I always get asked what's my least favorite part of my job. And I have to say the paperwork, I understand it. I know why we need it. We have to justify our services to insurance, and we have to make sure it's reproducible for the next therapist that might be seeing that patient. But that's probably my least favorite part of the job. So you have to document in a computer after every single session that you have with the patient as well.
You took the question right out of my mouth here. That was going to be one of the questions we're going to ask is what is the most challenging portion? And yeah, I think that might be a consistent theme amongst all the healthcare workers that we've talked to is the paperwork is definitely not something that they particularly enjoy.
No.
So question for you, you talked about inpatient, outpatient, and then there was another one in home, I think you kind of talked about as well.
Yep, in home.
From your perspective, which one do you like the most? What has been your favorite in that?
In being a manager, it was hard to stay competent in all of those areas. So while I oversee all those areas, I no longer treat in them. I only treat in outpatient. And I think when people think of physical therapy, that's probably the number one area they think of is outpatient therapy. People think of sports medicine and getting athletes back. And the thing I like about that setting is really just the diversity. I mean, I treat every body part. I treat, kids, and I treat all the way up through people that are 100 years old. So that's what really draws me to that is just the diversity of the patient population, the diversity of the diagnoses, and again, just the amount of time that I get to spend and get to know each of those patients really well over time.
Yeah, that's interesting because, from my perspective with my limited knowledge of physical therapy, I really only pictured it as like an outpatient process. I never thought about the in-home side or even the inpatient. roles that would be needed as well. So you
Mhm.
mentioned a little bit about sports medicine and working with athletes. So Rachel was wondering, like as a physical therapist, is there a way that you can just specialize in or just work more so with athletes? How are there specific roles at healthcare settings for that purpose?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the greatest things about physical therapy too. Like I said, the education starts out very general, but you can specialize in a lot of different areas. Now, you have to remember that finding a job in like a pediatric school setting is going to be more challenging, and there's going to be less of those than there are in like a general outpatient clinic or in an inpatient hospital setting or in a nursing home setting. So there's certainly that availability to work just for a sports team or work for an outpatient clinic that specializes in only athletes. Those opportunities are going to be a little harder to find. And it probably depends too, like if that person is really motivated, if they could get a clinical in one of those settings, that would definitely get them a leg up to work in just that specific setting. But like I said, there's a lot of other areas in physical therapy working. I have colleagues, I have, former classmates of mine who only work with people who have a traumatic brain injury and need help learning how to walk and talk again. And I have colleagues who only work with spinal cord injury patients. I have colleagues who concentrate just on people who have chronic pain like fibromyalgia. So there's definitely a lot of different areas out there, and it's just a matter of finding those opportunities. And then a lot of those areas will require specialty education as well.
Excellent, excellent. So I know you're working from home today, and I want to preface this. It's not because of Corona today. It's actually because of snow.
Yeah.
But I did hear you mention that you had some images of the actual
Yeah.
workspace. So I'm going to have Shannon pull up. She's got some images of the actual workspace that her department works in. And then I just want to remind students as she's pulling up the images here to share that if you do have questions, make sure you type them into the chat box so we can get those answered for you today.
So I am very lucky that in my job, we just built a new medical office building. It's right behind St. Nicholas Hospital in Sheboygan. And so it is a 5-story building, and therapy got the sweet spot on first floor, which is very convenient for our patients. So this is a picture of our gym. In this space, we have, we have a speech therapist who has her own office. We have 2 occupational therapists, and then we have 6 physical therapists. So this is our gym area. And then this is one end of it where we have some mat tables, and we'll treat patients with like shoulders, total knees here, ACL repairs, people with ankle and foot injuries, those types of things. And then we also have the availability for private treatment rooms. So this is one of our private rooms. So if we have somebody who has to, have their clothing off, or we're working on like their low back or a more sensitive area, or something where they need a little bit more quiet, we have some 4 private rooms where we can treat them in this space as well. And then again, there's a lot of specialties. So this is one corner of our gym area where we do something called work conditioning. So we have a perfect example of this right now. We had a patient who had a quadriceps repair, so front of his thigh, had to have that muscle reattached, and he is a firefighter. And so he went through all of his normal physical therapy, and I mean, he could walk, he could climb the stairs, he could, do all the things he needed to do at home. But obviously, being a firefighter, he has to climb stairs carrying people, and he has to squat down to the floor. And so now he is in a program where he comes a couple hours a day, 3 to 5 days a week, and does something called work conditioning. So we're helping him to simulate all of his actual work tasks so that he can return to all of his normal duties and go back and be a firefighter again. So that's what this corner of our gym is used for.
Awesome. And one of the questions as you were showing the gym space is how many other physical therapists do you work with at that location?
Yeah, so there's 6 physical therapists altogether, and then 2 occupational therapists and 1 speech therapist. So that's a pretty moderate sized group. We have another clinic that's about that same size, also in Sheboygan, and then we have one that's 3 therapists in Kohler and one that is 3 therapists in Plymouth.
Okay, so you work for the Purveya practice, and one of our students was wondering, do physical therapists typically, is it common that they would actually open their own practice, or is physical therapy more commonly associated with the hospitals and clinics throughout the state?
I would say in Wisconsin, it's generally either you're associated with a healthcare system or there are several groups that are like physical therapy franchises. So you would open your own clinic, but you would be under the umbrella of another organization. So that it's usually one of those two, I would say. People can open their own private practices. I think with the infrastructure you need for like HR and making sure people have insurance and then having the insurance authorization and billing portion, it's a little more involved.
Great. So getting back to some of your personal preferences here, one of the students was wondering if you could maybe, and you might have to think about this, but like what would be like the most difficult injury that you've had to work with along the way here?
I would say the hardest person I ever treated as far as an injury in the hospital, because I used to treat in the hospital, was a person who was in a motor vehicle accident. And they had broken, I don't know if I'm remembering this right, but it was like they broke their left arm and their right leg. And so then if you think about how you stand up, you either use crutches or a walker. So we had to get them like a platform walk where they could rest their arm but not hurt their wrist. And then we had to get them like a specialty attachment, and we had to teach them how to get in and out of bed with only putting their weight on one leg. So that was probably one of my hardest ones from an inpatient perspective that I ever treated. Just that's a big part of physical therapy. I feel like all the therapies is you have this knowledge base, but then there's no cookie cutter, right? Every person is unique and different. So sometimes you have to really stretch your imagination and either find something that motivates a person, a certain exercise or certain activity that motivates them to get back, or you have to find a different way of doing things. And that's also what I really like about physical therapy is just the fact that there's no 2 days that are ever the same. And I'm constantly stretching my imagination to do what's best for that patient. So that was probably my toughest inpatient one. Outpatient, right now I'm actually treating a post-COVID patient who was in the hospital for a month and a half, was intubated, had the tube and that whole thing we're hearing about people having to lie on their stomach. She was that for 10 days. She had home health for 8 weeks, and now she's been in outpatient physical therapy for 3 weeks. And so that's a challenge just because you're seeing improvements with her and it's awesome, but it's a slow recovery. So that is a totally different kind of challenge.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I wrote that down as a question earlier. I heard you mention inpatient and working with some of the COVID patients. So is that typically the people that have been most severely impacted by COVID? Is that the challenges that you're seeing right now in your role, or is there anything else?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting with COVID as far as physical therapy is some of these people are so deconditioned that amount of therapy and treatment that they can tolerate when they're inpatient is very limited. But obviously we're working with them and doing whatever we can to get them back to doing everything they need to. This specific patient that I'm treating currently went home and could not get herself out of bed. So, the fact that now she can walk 200 feet with a cane is kind of amazing. And she's going to continue to make progress too. So again, the rewarding part of our jobs is seeing that progress.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple more questions here. I know Elena has asked us a couple, and I'm going to weave them in here in just a little bit. But Jillian was wondering about, I think mental health has definitely been a topic that we've heard over the last year. Do you find your job is emotionally taxing, or, can it be just mentally draining?
I think there's definitely days when you feel stuck and you don't know what to have a patient do in any setting, right? And you're looking for a solution, you're looking for that motivation, and you can't find it. So there's definitely days like that, but I would say the number of days when I go home and I can take a reflection back on all the impact and all the rewarding things I've seen happen for people in a day definitely outnumber those challenging ones.
Oh, that's great. That's great to know. So, Elena, now we're going to kind of shift back to your educational path. She was wondering what was the toughest part for you during the process of schooling?
Clinicals are the very last part that you do. And honestly, by then, like, you're ready, you're prepared to do that. And so I think that part was really exciting. I also feel like you learn so much in school, but I learned more probably in my first year of actually working and being a physical therapist and being out there and doing that on my own than I did in all my years of school leading up to it. So that first year was challenging, but really rewarding. I think the toughest part of school is probably just getting accepted to PT school. Like I said, every school has different requirements, and then you have to apply. Some schools will require that you have done a certain amount of job shadowing hours. And some schools will require that you've taken certain courses. Some schools have interviews, although I think those are a little more rare. And they all have very high academic standards and GPAs that are required to apply. So I think that part was probably the most stressful part, just applying to school and finding out if you're accepted or not.
Yeah, I could see that's probably it's a long drawn out process. So along those lines, you talked about you have 6 therapists that work at your clinic in Sheboygan. Like, do all 6 of you just treat every age group and every injury, or do you have specialties within those 6 staff members?
Yeah, so we have specialties within those staff members as well. Our occupational therapists tend to focus on elbow, wrist, and hand injuries. And anything that's more fine motor activity, anything that requires fine motor skills with your hands. But then we have people, again, everybody started out as a generalist, but we have people that treat lymphedema, like chronic swelling, and they do massage and wrapping and bandaging for that. We have people who have a focus on treating cancer patients to keep them strong as they're going through treatment and to help them get back to their lives once they've completed their radiation, their chemotherapy, gone through surgeries. We have people that, I think I mentioned chronic pain, work conditioning. We have people that do safe driving assessments. I think that's the other thing about physical therapy or occupational therapy, speech therapy. We're always looking for new programs and new services that we can offer to help our patients and to help our community.
Awesome. Thank you. So, and students, for those of you that are on the call with us, I posted a link into the chat box. This session is sponsored by our friends with New AHEC, and they have a survey just to gather some feedback on the impact that this session had with you. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment after this session and complete that, it just takes a minute. That would be great. So one of the things, Shannon, we like to conclude our sessions on is just to utilize your life experience on help maybe reflect for students to get them to understand what would be a good move for them. And Nadia actually asked it at the very opening of the session, but she was wondering if you could change anything about the way or how you got to where you are right now. Would you change anything, or what would you recommend? I guess if looking back, is there anything you would change, or would you try to, do a little bit here? I know you talked about you made a big life decision around ballet during your undergraduate. So I guess if there's anything that you would change, what would that be?
I've mentioned it a bunch of times, and probably because it impacted me greatly, was just understanding the requirements that a physical therapy school requires and knowing whether you've met them or not. I ended up taking that gap year, which ended up being great, and it worked out for the best in the end. So definitely knowing that. And then I think, again, just when you think about physical therapy, everybody always thinks sports medicine. So even if your shadowing opportunities, your clinical opportunities, any opportunity you can to see as many settings as possible. There's physical therapists in schools. There's physical therapists that work in a NICU with babies. There's physical therapists who travel around and work at industries and help people solve ergonomic problems so they don't get injured on the job. So just realizing that there are a ton of different areas out there. And once you have that general education, you can follow wherever that passion leads you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was great. And students, thank you for your participation. Your questions were spot on. Again, I posted that link in the chat. Feel free to click on that link and complete that short survey. So Shannon, again, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to helping these students figure out what their next step in their career path is going to be.
Absolutely. And I'm the person who answers the questions on that Zello app. So if you have any questions that you didn't get answered here or anything that you want to ask more specifically, please feel free to chat on there.
Awesome. You're doing my job for me. I like it. Thank you so much.